It begins with recognizing the deep inequities that live among us. By making visible the invisible and bridging these vast divides, it sparks determination, not pity. It demands challenging the status quo, the courage to take paths less traveled, and the willingness to immerse in the shared truths of our vulnerabilities. It makes philanthropy work for communities, not for privilege. It calls for nurturing trust and radical kindness, the empathy to explore possibilities, and the humility to accept these in our oneness. It's the fierce ambition to be uncompromising, to satiate the hunger for learning, and to have the audacity to amplify the most vulnerable of voices. It requires perseverance, intelligence, and gusto, true moral courage for sustenance. It inspires leadership that adjusts the sails to catch the wind, to imagine possibilities in pursuit of a higher purpose bigger than ourselves, but that together is surmountable. Dasra, it combines the power of the mind and the courage of the heart to tackle large-scale inequities, building an India that we all deserve, thriving with dignity and equity.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dasra Philanthropy Week 2023. We are glad to have you all join us today. Dasra Philanthropy Week is currently in its 14th edition, and it has always stood as a platform to bring together diverse stakeholders and voices from the development ecosystem to convene, converse, and continue sustained action towards the quest for 1 billion Indians to thrive with dignity and equity. We're delighted to share that this edition is hosting 40 plus sessions across diverse themes, hear voices of 100 plus thought leaders, and have more than 2,000 plus attendees tune in for both of our in-person and virtual events. This is the most extensive spread of programming we've ever had at DPW, and are excited for a lineup of thought-provoking sessions we have lined up for you today. Welcome to the session, Augmenting Capacity of Public Systems, Unlocking New Paradigms with Philanthropy. This session is being held in partnership with the Nudge Institute, and we have Shubhoshri Datto, Managing Partner, Social Entrepreneurship at the Nudge Institute, joining us today. Shubhoshri has over 30 years of investing experience in the Asian credit markets across the broad spectrum of credit strategies. She has worked with Fiera Capital Asia, formerly Clearwater Capital Partners, for about 20 years, and her last assignment was as CEO of its Singapore office. She was also a member of the firm's investment and management committees. She started her career with ICICI Bank in India. Shubhoshri has a PGDM from IIM Calcutta and is a CFA charter holder. It is my pleasure to now hand the floor over to Shubhoshri from the Nudge Institute. Over to you, Shubhoshri.
Thank you so much, Exna. It's really a pleasure to welcome our panel today that bring very different perspectives on how new models are bringing about systemic change and who are the actors we need to enable this change. Firstly, we have Ruchi Mathur, who is co-founder and CEO of Lighthouse Communities Foundation, a non-profit that works in partnership with government, civil society, and private sector to enable large-scale economic transformation. It works in the area of skilling and livelihoods, primarily working with youth that are 18 to 30 years old, and enabling agency skilling and livelihoods. Ruchi has earlier worked as CSR head for ZSR Technologies, COO for Teach for India, and with CRY. She's an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad. Next, we have Umakant Soni, who is the co-founder and CEO of ArtPark AI and Robotics Technology Park. He's focused on building the AI mothership for billions of users in India, He's a nominated expert from India's side for the Global Partnership on AI, or GPAI. He's also the chairman of AI Foundry and has co-founded India's first AI fund and has backed some of the best AI companies in India. He's an alumnus of IIT Kanpur. Welcome, Umakant and Ruchi. Aparna leads the JPAL South Asia's Innovations in Data and Experiments for Action, IDEA Lab, where she engages extensively with state and national governments, partners, and various other stakeholders focusing on data accessibility, quality, and usability, and strengthening data within the government agencies. She was earlier leading JPAL's large-scale partnership with the state government of Tamil Nadu, which she continues to be involved with in an advisory role. Prior to JPAL, she has consulting experience with the World Bank, IFMR, and other organizations. Aparna has a master's in international policy from University of California, San Diego, and a master's in economics from Gokhale Institute, India. So I'm really honored to have this panel who is pushing the envelope in enabling new relationships between stakeholders in various ways. Ruchi with the PPPs, Umakant with AI, and Aparna with data. I'll start with Ruchi. Ruchi, you have a unique public-private partnership model where a collective action model needs not only to scale, but also leverages the specific expertise of various stakeholders. Can you tell us more about your unique model?
Thank you, Subhashri. And firstly, thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor to be on this panel. I'll jump straight into it. So yes, I represent a nonprofit Lighthouse Communities Foundation, as Subhashri mentioned. And we have a vision of enabling underserved youth to realize their full potential through sustained livelihoods and good citizenship. We run 3 or 4 a bouquet of programs to enable this. One is called the Lighthouse Program. The second is a bouquet of programs under Global Opportunity Youth Network, as well as digital empowerment and social emotional learning programs. So as Subhashish mentioned, right from the genesis of Lighthouse Communities Foundation, and we started work in 2015, the idea was to enable a collective action approach, very much, sort of anchored by a PPP. And the idea is to enable civil society, government, as well as the private sector to come together so that one can enable transformational change rather than incremental shifts. So as far as government is concerned, for example, if we look at the Lighthouse program, the lighthouses are these physical centers. They are, 3,000 square feet in area. The space for the lighthouses is provided by the government. So for example, in Pune, which is where we started our work, Pune Municipal Corporation provides the space. It's of course free of cost. But apart from that, we also work with an architect and submit a design which will transform that space so that it's an aspirational space for young people to come to. So they do the renovation of this of the space as well as provide IT equipment and furniture. So all the capex, so to speak, is provided by the government. And on the other hand, the private sector comes in for enabling the programs to actually run. Today, I would say that approximately 16 to 17 crores, over $2 million of funds have come in from the government just in terms of one-time expenses. And ongoing, if one looks at notional rent, then that would be close to another $2 million. So that's the extent of, investment that the government is making in the programs. When it comes to skilling organizations, because the Lighthouse and our other programs, they're all about enabling people to reach their full potential. And so it's about giving freedom of choice. So if we are not running the skilling programs ourselves, we partner with other organizations. So today, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's for-profit organizations, we have partnered with around 105 skilling organizations across the country to deliver the best of the skilling ecosystem to the young people in the 9 cities that we serve them in. And when it comes to the employer ecosystem, there are around 7,500 employers where young people have got placed. And it's mainly, this ecosystem approach is something which helps with saturation of a city. So it's a place-based approach. And if you look at Pune as an example, then today in 6 years' time, we are present in around 450 out of 550 slum communities of Pune. 1.2 lakh citizens have been directly impacted through various programs, and more than approximately close to 15,000 have got jobs just in Pune itself. So today, wherever you go in Pune, one will come across a lighthouse alumni who's working in that place, whether it's a retail store or coffee shop and so on and so forth. So this collective action and PPP model has really worked for us. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. It's really interesting. And what I also like about your model is you're enabling the youth to get access to various professions by partnering with other organizations, and really, cannot underscore the importance of collaboration in our sector to get the widest reach. Umakant, how do we democratize AI and technology to bring 200 plus million people out of poverty? We hear about loss of jobs and how there will be paradigm shifts in how employment will move. And would you see the role of government and philanthropy and other stakeholders, including academia too, that they must play in enabling this shift?
No, very true. I think one of the and I think everybody has heard about ChatGPT, so I don't have to actually talk much about AI per se or the kind of impact it could bring. My kids are doing homework with it, so I know that the impact has really driven home as well. One of the big powerful shifts that we are seeing, and of course I have invested in 14, 15 companies, and I've seen how one of the big remarkable transformation AI is bringing is human-like ability for people who may not have that capability, right? So if I look at one of the companies that we'd invested in, it's a company called Nirmay, which allows nurses to screen women for breast cancer very early, right? So it helps in early detection of breast cancer, right? And earlier, that woman would have to go to a major center, and that would have to be screened by a doctor, which entails higher cost, right? And at the same time, for the nurse, it's a extra money that she's able to make because she's able to leverage on something else. So especially driven by AI. So what we have seen very on the ground, right, while people talk about shifting of jobs and other things, I think what it is going to do is to actually make people more productive, right? And the usual way people have been becoming productive is like 15, 16 years of education or skilling, and then you acquire those skills, and it comes at an expense, right? Now, maybe the AI transformation that we are seeing allows you to leapfrog, right, and get to that destination much faster, much quicker. And that's a real possibility, and we see that that could actually bring a whole set of capabilities which ordinarily would have taken much longer time for people to get to, and that actually represent a very real opportunity for people to leapfrog out of the extreme poverty, and that's a very real story. The challenges are also there, like if the distribution or accessibility of this technology is not uniform, then it could lead to concentration of wealth even further. So I think that is where we are trying to play a role, especially with ArtPath, by bringing industry, academia, and government together and looking at can we take this massive technology leap and use it to create a positive change in the society, and look at really solving problems that we face around. And it's not easy. I think this all the three stakeholders, they speak different languages, and just getting each other to be comfortable with the languages spoken around could be of course has been very challenging, but at the same time it is also promising because governments have the mandate to take the change to billion plus people, right? They are the only people, right? So if I look at government is a very large cooperative, right? If I were to look at from that perspective, where all of us, we pay taxes and we get something back from it, right? And since it's a cooperative, each person who's contributing, and everybody's contributing, right? Even if a poor farmer buys a bar of soap, he or she is actually paying some taxes, right? Which may be much more disproportionate with respect to the income that she's actually making. So it's a cooperative. It's a very real cooperative. And since it has the mandate to be really make things accessible, and that's where we thought that we want to bring that particular stakeholder into equation as we try to democratize AI, and that involves things at various steps. One is of course the technology challenge, right? We've been actually trying to build these data sets for because in India you have the language changes every few kilometers, right? So it's not that one speech to text algorithm will work for everyone. It's not going to work like that. So you need to have, and if it, because the languages in India have evolved over a long period of time, right? So, and they have evolved to describe the local context. So they are very important, right? So language has been one big challenge in democratizing access to such advanced technology, because if you can talk to a computer or talk to a machine and use that to enhance your capability, it's a very real access that you have to a much better outcome out of your life. Today, it's really a challenge. It's a birth lottery. If you are born in a large city to good affluent parents, maybe if your parents were already having good access to learning and education, you actually have a massive leap ahead of you, right? But if I really talk about people in the villages, they don't have access to technology. They have to migrate for work. It creates socioeconomic challenges. So how do we bring digital work, enhanced work to the rural areas? That's another big set of opportunities that we are seeing. Third one is, of course, healthcare is a big reason why people fall into poverty. I mean, 60+% of the people fall into poverty because either they fall sick or near or dear in their family falls sick, right? So how do we bring accessible, high potential healthcare to everyone? That's a big challenge that we see. Which technology, by early diagnostics, we have already seen. We see that by 2030, 80% of the healthcare is going to be outside of the hospital, right? So how do we provide that as a framework? How do we bring technology to lower the cost of healthcare and make it accessible to everyone? That's a big potential challenge that we see. One big area that we are seeing is learning and enabling. We have 300 million school kids, right? And having them leverage the fruits of AI by learning in a very different way, learning to learn, learning by doing, and maybe not just learning numeracy and literacy, but also learning algorithmic literacy, right, which is becoming important for them to thrive in future, not just survive in future. That is a very real opportunity. In fact, the future of these 300 million kids will determine where we land up, not just as a nation, but also as a society, because India is going to have probably the largest number of young kids in the world. So these are the three big areas that we see where technology will play a large part. And I think we seek inputs from all the stakeholders. I've been coming from a venture capital background, and one of the reasons what we've been trying to think about is like, how do we create sustainable change. I mean, systems of change which are sustainable, not just socially but also financially, because if they continue to keep changing the society in a positive way, maybe we would actually have a better tomorrow for our kids. So I think that is a new perspective that we've been exploring. How do we create these sustainable systems of change via impact startups, as we call them. And I think we've had some learnings and some more to go.
Thanks, Umakant, and that was really interesting. And AI, you need data for AI, so it segues nicely into Aparna's kind of field of expertise. And I would like to ask her that how can we use data for systems change? And can you give us a few examples of how you have been using data with other stakeholders to build a long-term vision?
Sure. Thank you, Vishri. And as you rightly said, it's a nice segue. There is a lot of interest around use of technology. And as Umakant was just describing, it could be a game changer in the kinds of things we're able to do. What needs to catch up along that is the massive volumes of data that these digital technologies generate and how we think about it. And so as a research organization at JPAL, our commitment is to use evidence in research to inform policy decisions at scale. And so this means that our research studies are strongly embedded along with theory in the data that we collect locally on the ground or data that is generated through these technology systems to test interventions, to measure impact, to measure long-term outcomes, which then can feed back into the decision-making processes. So this fundamentally shifts the way we think about data as something that is used for, say, reporting purposes or for administrative purposes of delivering government services to a fundamental way of thinking about data as a decision-making tool. And what we mean by that is that it becomes an input into the entire policy or decision life cycle, as we call it, from identifying where the gaps and where the problems are, to design appropriate relevant solutions that can be targeted at the most vulnerable or people who are being left out, to use data to measure the impact of such interventions, and eventually, of course, scale up the most successful or innovative ideas so that they don't just remain in silos and can actually be converted into policies and programs. So I'd like to, I think, take a couple of examples to tell you where we are seeing some promising developments in this direction. One such area is in the space of elderly population and their care. So on the one side, we have a growing young population, but in certain parts of the country, especially in the south, in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, we also have the problem of an aging population. And as part of our partnership with the government of Tamil Nadu, this was identified as one of the areas where policy needs to start thinking about it. However, there was no data that was presently available on the elderly as a cohort. So one of the ideas that came out of this engagement was to actually think to build a longitudinal data set, which is you capture data from a sample of individuals or households at a fixed frequency. So every 2 years, we go back to this 5,000 households with elderly population and track the changes over time. We've now done 2 rounds of these, and the interesting part of this collaboration is the data is collected by the Economics and Statistics Department of the state government. The research design, the kinds of questions, the sampling is provided by researchers related to the JPAL network, and a lot of consultations with stakeholders, with people from the public health field, people from research, of course, and on-ground agencies. With 2 rounds of data collection now, which were 2 years apart, 2 or 3 things stood out, which would have otherwise not been possible, I think, without this data, was that there were a large proportion of elderly living alone, which meant that their children had either migrated to other parts of the country, to cities or out of the country. And so you increasingly had either single member elderly households or elderly couples living together. And this had implications for how they would access healthcare, how they would access their pensions and financial services. And so this has led to actually 2 or 3 types of directions which we're engaging with in the government to try and address. One part of it is social security. How do you adapt the existing pension systems to reach elderly to make it easier for them to access these benefits? And especially during COVID, having this panel data set helped us quickly follow up with the elderly households to see where the challenges were, whether they were receiving rations or not, whether they were receiving financial assistance, and be able to feed that back to the government so that they could take corrective action. The elderly living alone, for instance, was a bit of a surprise to everybody. While we knew social systems were breaking down a little bit and changing, the proportion of it was almost 20% of the sample which were elderly living alone, which meant there was need for interventions around, say, loneliness, around cognition, which is an increasing trend in this population subgroup. And then finally, I think Umakant mentioned this earlier as well, on health challenges. A lot of us, not just the elderly, even among ourselves, conditions go undetected, which means that we may not know whether we have diabetes or hypertension until a problem crops up. And so this is sort of the same thing that we see in the elderly population as well. Self-reported data is very different from the actual observational health data. So the panel data set actually enabled the department to also collect not just socioeconomic information, but undertake health checkups to be able to assess the health status. And so now there is actually very interesting interventions being designed to say, could we use machine learning techniques with simple tests to be able to predict who are the people most at risk, who should be taken to a PHC, or for instance, get the medical services to the village or to the homes of the people. And so the entire range of questions and how this is informing thinking, policy thinking, and decisions around what are the needs of the elderly, what are the kinds of interventions that should be designed is, in a sense, the ideal way to think about it. And of course, combined, it is not just data alone, right? It needs to be combined with policy experience, with on-ground practice, as well as financial constraints, resource constraints, but it becomes a strong guide to identifying where the most needs are and where to target financial resources. So there are examples like these which then help build the culture of thinking about data for decision making. And so with things like, and we see these examples in use of maternal and child health apps which are being developed and how that can be used to improve immunization outcomes. There is strong evidence from past research which we've done both with NGOs as well as with the government in Haryana to look at how to target small behavioral nudges to improve full immunization rates among children. And so this is now going back again to see how nonprofits could actually help the government solve the last mile challenges in improving demand for immunization services. So some of these examples, the purpose they serve is to demonstrate to all stakeholders, from the frontline worker to the head of the department or the policymaker, on how to think about leveraging data, relevant data, good quality data, to make the right sorts of decisions in environments where we're always resource constrained. And so once that you see the demonstration yourself and you can anchor it in use of data, is when investments will be made in improving the quality of data and in systematically thinking about data at every step of program design and implementation.
Thank you, Aparna. This 20% number will stay with me. That is really much higher than I thought it would be. What is also interesting in what you shared is the government continues to be front and center, the largest scale lever to any intervention in the country. And at the Nudge Institute, we have something called the Indian Administrative Fellowship, where there's an 18-month program where we are working with state governments and civil servants to work on specific problem statements. So we have these dynamic civil servants that have problem statements, and we bring in people from CXO level people from industry for a period of 18 months to work with these IS officers on specific problems. We had a very successful Karnataka first cohort, and the second one is being planned. We are now in Punjab and looking at other states. And some of the issues that the first IF cohort in Karnataka worked toward, including leveraging AI and technology to increase farmers' income, providing real-time nutrition and health data access to Anganwadis, strengthening market access for FPOs, and credit access and financial inclusion for SHGs. So this is really, kind of a win-win partnership to augment the capacity of the government, bringing in private sector talent. And philanthropy is recognizing the power of investing in this long-term systemic change. And Z has been the pioneer, which has been funding our IF program. So moving on, disruptive models like these need critical thinking, but they also need a phenomenal level of stakeholder management to bring it all together. And I would like all of you to opine on your experience of how you've navigated stakeholder relationships and how you've made it work. Aparna, as a neutral player, you've had deep experience across various stakeholders. Can you highlight some successes and challenges that you faced, and how do we enable a mindset change to embrace the systemic change?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think for bringing about a mindset and systems change, it is bringing together all the people involved in the process, and that has its advantages in the scale that one can achieve, but it also brings with it challenges of coordination, different incentives, different timelines of the different players involved, and it is something that we have been working towards almost right from when we started our work in India. And there are a couple of things which have stood out consistently. One is to adopt a long-term vision. These are difficult problems to solve. These are complex challenges to solve. And it requires all the different stakeholders to be aligned on that long-term vision while making incremental improvements in the shorter term. And two principles almost, which I think are important and which we try to follow everywhere. One is to co-create the vision and co-create the agenda. So the elderly panel example that I talked about before was one such instance where the problem was identified together. All of the stakeholders were committed on the problem we're trying to solve. And it brings together the relative experience. I think Ruchi mentioned that at the beginning, is to bring together people with different expertise and experience and how we could leverage that together. And so in co-creating that agenda and that vision, what it helps do is have different players take ownership for individual parts of the problem, because it requires that collective approach to solve policy challenges and social impact challenges at scale. The second part, I think, which is important is maintaining communication at the right times about the right, both small successes as well as challenges that are faced, so that you could course correct along the way. And so, for instance, people often have this view of research that a person comes in, has an initial discussion, then we disappear for 3 years and we come back when a paper has to be published, right? And that is not how research works anymore, especially when we're in the space of development and impact evaluations. It is important to talk every week, every month, to understand what's happening on the field, the environment around us changes, and to communicate what we're learning as insights from the data. And oftentimes some of our assumptions are challenged. And it's important to, again, bring that collective decision-making together to be able to address those challenges. There are ways in which, of course, notwithstanding, so some of the challenges, for example, is when you work in policy windows, they are guided by electoral timelines, they're guided by bureaucratic and administrative timelines. So there will be transfers, there will be changes, there will be fires, there will be COVID pandemics, and it is about trying to work through all of those changes. In fact, I often say that the pandemic, for instance, is a great instance of showing how people can come together to solve a problem. And you saw private sector, government, academia all come together. And the same thing somehow when in non-war time breaks down, right? So what can we learn from there to keep going? And one of our recent experiences in Orissa is, I think, indicative a bit of that. We had a highly successful program which was designed by an NGO called Breakthrough, which designs gender equity curriculum, which was tested and evaluated in Haryana in about 300 schools. And we've set up a partnership with the Vedis Foundation. It's really an alliance for bringing together scale up and research and evidence. And under that, we were able to propose the gender equity curriculum training in schools in Orissa, which is at the scale of thousands, which meant you had a year of preparatory work that had to go in with Breakthrough, with other partners locally in the state, the departments within the government of Orissa, researchers to think about how to set up the program and the process monitoring system in the state. And it took all of that together and systematic funding of that work. We often take that for granted. And if you invest that time in the setup and the startup of that work, then it sets the seeds for successful scale up of those programs. So I think all of these elements are, we learn as we grow as well, but some of these elements are absolutely critical in ensuring collaborative successes.
Thank you, Aparna. Co-create and communicate is the things I took down. Ruchi, PPP, the biggest P is partnership. So how do you make your partnership work?
Yeah, so well, actually adding on to what Aparna said, completely agree about the co-creation, the communication, and the other points that you made, Aparna. One of the things, that we figured is that, and it actually kind of evolved along with working with the government as well as, the private sector players, that the officers in the government would say that, this model actually works well for us because we are not people who are really experts in designing or running programs with a consistent, quality parameter. It's not where our core strength is, but something like civic work, or otherwise, provision of space, mobilizing people in communities, which is another, important aspect that the government helps us with. These are things which actually we are happy doing. And it's in fact something which is part of our core role as well. And on the other hand, when we approach and a shout out, to private sector players who, particularly not just are okay with, but appreciate, a partnership with the government. They say that this works well for them because they would rather invest in operating expenses rather than, creation of social assets. So I think basically the point being that if one is working with each partner to be able to leverage their strengths and what it is that they are comfortable bringing to the table, then it becomes much more sustainable. I think the second point, and there are 4-5 points in my mind as I speak. The second point really is about taking away the pain of coordination. Because at the end of the day, it is difficult to coordinate, at a regular pace, unless it is like really part of my core role. It may or may not happen, and then things slip, like what Aparna was saying. What few years may go by, and then when you need something, and that's natural. But so we step in and say that we will do the coordination. So the private sector doesn't have to necessarily connect with the government and vice versa. But it is our responsibility to talk the language of the government with the government and of the private sector with the private sector. And and actually thanks to, in particular, to Pune Municipal Corporation, because that's where we really learned what that language is and how to sustain this. And I think that's something that has really helped. Third aspect really is that I think that at the end of the day, for any collaboration to work, it has to actually be a win-win. And the fact that, so in the beginning, when we actually started working with Pune Municipal Corporation, and that was actually a discussion between our chairman, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, and the then Municipal Commissioner of Pune, Mr. Kunal Kumar. It was actually not with an agenda that livelihoods has to happen, but it was around what the government thinks needs to happen. So, going back to that point about the co-creation aspect. And so this was something that was alive together as another aspect that at that time Pune Municipal Corporation really wanted to drive was digital literacy in the city of Pune. And so that was also taken on. So in that sense, it was about what actually is part of the government's priorities. And it wasn't about, what is it that we particularly want to run. So I think that's the third aspect about relevance. I think the relationships aspect is extremely important. So, everyone, of course, we know the importance of relationships. When it comes to the government partnership, it's about, not just that the relationship has to be with the person who's the senior most. So administrative head would be, the municipal commissioner, but it's also about all the way, especially because ours is an operational partnership where there's actual like electrical work happening and mobilization on the ground happening. So it's with the social workers, it's with the junior engineers, and it's all along the line and the continuum really. And not just with the administrative folks, but also with the political, the corporators on the ground, because finally the programs are for on-ground communities. And that's how, they really, we really value what they bring in terms of the recognition and saliency to the Lighthouse program, and also the inputs that they provide. And that really brings me to the last point, which I think is the most important, which is related to authenticity. Because my belief is that definitely it holds true for me, and my belief is it holds true for most of us at Lighthouse Communities Foundation, that if you tap someone on the shoulder and say, what is it like working with the government? My answer is, it's awesome. Like, we really enjoy working with the government. And I love it. Means once one understands how it works, it's actually a predictable process. And when something works, and it works at scale. So I think that people also recognize that there is a genuineness in this partnership, and there's a respect. I remember one time Amrita Bahudekar, who's the head of our program, there was a particular corporator we needed to solve a problem with respect to the launch, and we were apprehensive that it's going to become a little political. And we were like, what do we do? We felt stuck. It was the day before the launch. And then we said, let's have a conversation. And we went across and spoke to him and explained about the public-private partnership and how neutrality is important for the donor and so on and so forth. And you know what? He just got it. And after that, in fact, he became an advocate and has helped deal with other such situations as well. So I think this belief and faith that if we talk, then things will get sorted out is all part of, the authenticity of that relationship. So yeah, these are some of the aspects that have worked, and really, really grateful to both government partners as well as the private sector partners who helped to make this sustain.
Thank you, Ruchi. And bearing the pain of coordination is a big role. The glue that binds it all together really is,
So right.
to make it work. Umakant, you have extensive experience working closely with the government as well, and you're including being an advisor to Niti Aayog. How do you reconcile interests of different stakeholders when you're faced with kind of crossroads?
Absolutely. I think it's important to understand that different stakeholders, are coming with, especially when you're talking about technology-led impact and transformation, right? I mean, they have a different background to themselves, right? Like, so if you look at industry, the time scale in which they operate, for them, the opportunity cost of the time is very, very high, right? If you look at academia, it's a bit longer. They're used to looking at longer horizons, and the research takes time and everything, right? If you look at government, it could be timeless, right? Like they've been there yesterday, they will be there tomorrow, right? So getting all the stakeholders aligned on the same time scale can be a big challenge. I think it's a continuous process of communication and understanding, how each person or each stakeholder values that particular aspect. The other big challenge is also, if I look at impact, right, it means different to different people. Like industry is like, okay, can I see it on the ground? Can I see it working? Can I see it, actually, doing something, right? Whereas maybe impact for academia could be that, okay, I share the knowledge or the new knowledge that is getting created via papers, and that could be interesting. Impact for government could be the policy creation part, right? Like where I create the policy and let other stakeholders come together to solve a problem, right? Now, aligning all of them on the same impact, right? Like, okay, it's not just that we will create the policy, but we'll also eventually get the impact onto people, and getting everybody aligned. Of course, it can be very challenging, but on the other side, what is fantastic is that with government you can truly scale an impact, right? Like with industry, if you create a solution which is economically sustainable, you can probably get it to people who pay for it, right? But if you are able to figure out a way to work with the government, they are the ones who are truly having the mandate to take it to 1.36 billion people. So they are the one who are actually incentivized by scaling it to every single person. So I think the technology, scaling that impact part is massive, and I think that has to be appreciated, because no kind of industry can actually take the impact to everyone. The other part, which is kind of very interesting, is like how everybody looks at funding such impact, right? Like for government, it's like I want to fund an ecosystem approach to create that impact, right? The industry is very, very specific that okay, this is a startup, or this is an intervention that could lead to maybe impact which might be economically sustainable, and that's where they want to go in. Academia is a lot more open. It's like even no impact is a learning, right? So they're very wide in their perspective, and they have to be, right? I think if you have to be very open and explore all the avenues, you have to look at all the aspects. Okay, yeah, this did not create any impact. That itself is also a learning that they need to document and maybe share it with others. So I see that multiple stakeholders have different perspective in terms of timelines, in terms of what constitutes impact, and also what actually truly impact is, right? In terms of in terms of scaling it, and how it eventually will be received. So they have different definitions, and you have to respect the definition because they are coming from a deep background in that part. Having said that, evolving a common language for dialogue is critical, so that what we are trying to work for, right? Like at ArtPark, we had this aim of impacting 1 billion people by 2030. It's a massive goal, right? I mean, how do we do that? And I don't think you can achieve it by a few people working closely. It's not possible. So you have to work with the largest stakeholders, and even to get awareness among them is like, okay, yes, this is an intervention, and government could understand that intervention, but also having an appreciation that it takes a while to create that, right? And there is a X amount of money that might be involved, a Y amount of time that might be involved, and eventually, how do you make sure that impact is sustainable, scalable? That's another ball game altogether. So I think, as Parna was pointing out, I think 3 things are very important: communication, 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 and it's a constant state of dialogue. And I think the idea is that the sooner we start this dialogue in India, especially, more important it is for us, because if you're the task is that we want to take 200 million people out of extreme poverty, and this is going to become even more challenging with the technology shifts that we are seeing, where the nature of job could shift, the nature of work could shift, how we enable people could shift as well. This dialogue is even more critical. The nature of society might shift as well. I mean, we are aiming to go to Industry 4.0. Now, with each evolution of industry, whether it's agriculture, industrial, knowledge, or Industry 4.0, which is the AI-driven industry, society has changed. The very nature of work has changed. How people relate to each other and the economic incentive, everything has changed. So, to create Society 4.0, which will go along with Industry 4.0, is extremely critical. Otherwise, there's going to be tear in the fabric of society. That's a challenge that I foresee. And I think for creating that Society 4.0, it's a constant communication between industry, academia, and government is extremely critical.
Thank you, Umakant. We have some questions streaming in, so I will address them and staple some of my own to it as well. So, Ruchi, a question you have is, how did Lighthouse convince the government to contribute with space, which is the most expensive? While you reply to that, I also want you to add your vision of long-term systemic change your model can bring about, because you're working with youth and only livelihoods will bring 220 million out of poverty. So it, kind of scalability of your model is something which is at the heart and center of bringing India out of poverty.
Thank you, Subhashri. I'll address the second part first in terms of what our vision or dream, I would say, is really. And that is that, in working with the government and with this kind of amazing involvement by the government, and where they are also seeing the results. And that's the reason that, they are also wanting to keep the partnership going. Like in terms of, we have one of the highest, if not the highest, retention rates, like long-term retention in jobs in the urban livelihood space. And the government is seeing that, and they've told us this, that, this is one program that the BBC is working. So their emotional and cognitive investment, hopefully, is there in this program. Over a period of time, could one therefore start shifting, the way that programming happens for livelihoods, so we don't have time in this panel to go into it in detail, but essentially, one of the very unique aspects of the Lighthouse design is that it is extremely focused on enabling agency in youth. It's first and foremost about enabling young people to be able to make decisions for themselves about what they want to do in life, including in the area of livelihoods. And then it is about, helping them make that happen. And so, in working with the government on this over a period of time, can one shift the thinking and influence the design process in the country as far as livelihoods is concerned? Because truly, agency-led approach to livelihood programming results in far greater, lifetime-related benefits than a more short-term approach. And currently, there is a more short-term and tactical approach as far as programming is concerned. It's many times focused on technical skilling and those kinds of inputs, rather than working a human-centric approach where one is working with self-image and mindset shifts. So this is actually the dream. It's not a small thing, but hopefully, in fact, Umakant mentioned a 1 million goal. I guess there's something magical about that number. We too have a mission of 1 million young people with agency by 2030, and this in partnership with the government and with the research that is actually demonstrating what is the long-term impact of this kind of approach, should be able to actually, we hope, move the needle. So basically, goal-related, moving to lifetime earnings rather than placements, and process-related, moving to an agency-led approach. And as far as the question about the space is concerned, I think two very quick aspects. One is the fact that actually this model itself was co-created. So it's not as if we approached the government and said that this is what we thought and could you provide the space. But it actually emerged through a series of conversations about how can one make this program be scalable and sustainable. And so the thought came through that. And once, Pune Municipal Corporation actually took the lead in doing the provision of space, and it worked well for the government, then other governments also kind of felt that there's a precedent now. So I think that's what helped. And I think the last thing is that, I remember that right long back in the beginning when this model was being embarked upon, then that the municipal commissioner of that time, he was asked that, why should we do this? I spoke about Kunal Kumar. Then you will get transferred and then everything will come to naught, kind of a thing. And he said that, the best way to be sustainable is that you are actually making on ground a big difference, because if that's happening, then the corporators also would like the programs to continue, and that's what makes the difference. And I think actually those are that's how it panned out, and hope for this to continue. Thank you.
Hey, Aparna, how do you think philanthropic capital can push the envelope in creating impact? So are you seeing from the various, kind of assignments that you look at that philanthropic capital is indeed supporting long-term outcomes?
Yes, I think definitely, but some of us said this before as well, given that the potential for scale exists when working with governments, there's a lot more, I think, in the last decade or so, a lot more openness across the board, private sector philanthropy, to work with governments to scale up successful programs. And so that has required different approaches also to be evolved in thinking about philanthropic capital and how it can be most effective, where is it most useful. Some of it is in this platform alliance building, which I think Ruchi mentioned earlier. So somebody has to play that role of coordination. And that's something that funding could actually bring together. As you'd see, there are many initiatives we talked about, especially if you think about climate change, which is one of the biggest challenges we are going to be facing. It will affect us through different sectors, if you were to speak. It'll have its implications on food security, on agriculture, on health. So it is no longer enough to or sufficient to work in our silo. The modelers who are predicting, say, flood instances have to be able to speak to public health officials who can then inform what should be the strategies to respond to that. We need understanding from communities to say, how do we get the information to communities in a timely manner so that they act on it? We need to be in touch with local government officials to make preparations ahead of time. So this interdisciplinary approach has to come together, and we see a role for, I think, some of this this pulling together of different players. And one such initiative, I would say, is one of the most recent partnerships we've entered into is with data.org. which was looking at this exact intersection of climate change and health. And what it attempts to do is provide this platform to address both the supply and demand sides of the problem. Is how do we use data to address some of these challenges? It requires creating data talent that will be interested in working in the social impact space. And it requires social impact organizations, whether nonprofits, startups, or governments, to be able to absorb that talent into projects, into problems that can be solved using data science solutions. And so Ndata.org is essentially, is also a consortium of donors that have come together to pull together this platform that can play this convening role. And so it attempts to, it has this long-term vision. It attempts to solve different aspects of the challenges, and it brings together expertise and stakeholders from different sides. So I think these are some of the changes, some of the earlier work that I described on the preliminary or preparatory work that has to go in co-creating an agenda, needs some funding. We see donors becoming open to funding things beyond a program. I think traditionally, a lot of us in the nonprofit space have seen funding would go to a program to test one intervention. Now there's a much more systems view to it, saying how can we think about capacity? How can we think about curating the questions itself and doing the preparatory work or the coordination? And I think more of that needs to be done as well. And yes, I hope to see more of it in the future.
Thank you, Aparna. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. There are many questions in the chat as well as from my side as well. But I thank our panelists for their time and this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Dasra, for facilitating this. There is a response poll which is will pop up on your screen. So request the attendees to give their session feedback. Thank you very much to our panelists and to Dasra.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, 8%.